Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. This is our first of our 3 spring mentorship mingles. I'm Jen Dawson. I'm the one you've been talking to on email. I'm the Associate Director of Educational Programs, and my partner in crime is Dr. Haraluk, who I'm going to turn it over to now.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We're very excited for you to join us tonight, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jennifer Schoch, who is an assistant professor of dermatology at the University of Florida and is our keynote speaker tonight. She attended University of Iowa Medical School, completed her derm residency at the Mayo School of Graduate Medical Education in Rochester, where she also completed pediatric dermatology fellowship. I've come to know Jen through PeDRA, so I'll hopefully share these glimpses that I've come to know her through. My first impression of Dr. Schoch came back in 2019 at PeDRA's annual meeting. I know she was there before that, but really was so impressed how she jumped into the Research Hot Seat event. This was she did an incredible job presenting her ideas in the Shark Tank format, where I was holding my own ideas in and feeling shy. She was ready to just jump in there and share, which was awesome. Was not surprised at all to see her then in 2019 receive the PeDRA Weston Career Development Award. In 2021, she received the 2nd Annual Childhood Eczema Challenge Grant from the National Eczema Association in PeDRA. And if you're looking for more Jen time after tonight's presentation, you can check out the PeDRA publication presentation on her recent collaborative study on skin microbiome sampling in the preterm neonate. These are things that I like to do during my commute to and from work, so hopefully you'll get plenty of Jen. Thank you so much, Jen, for joining us. We're really excited for you to share your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. This is an easy topic to talk about, but it's a little bit harder practically to enact. And I do appreciate and understand that. And it's funny, thinking back to the Shark Tank, I was so nervous. So remember that when you first get started trying to sell yourself in research or trying to advocate for yourself in academics, few people, myself included, are born with the skill to do that. It's a learned skill. So that's part of what this topic is about, is having a few practiced or rehearsed sayings, pitches, basically, and then building from there. So how to bring up your research topic. Let's jump in. So the first thing that I think is really central to talking about your research topic is, why do you want to do research in the first place? So if you don't have the inquisitive spirit, if you don't have good clinical questions you're asking, then when you're trying to pitch your research idea, when you're trying to bring up your research, when you're trying to get a mentor to guide you in a research project, if you don't have that inquisitive spirit, then it may be harder to get that buy-in and that engagement from mentors or funders. And so this is why this is at the top. I think this is far and away the most important thing of why we do research. It's because we want to know more. Other reasons we do research is for recognition and promotion. So some of you who are medical students, it's important to get residency. And then unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. Then residency to get fellowship, fellowship to get a good faculty position. And then when you're faculty, to try to make research part of your career is not easy. People don't actually just give you that research assignment anymore. But when you do make headway in research, it really helps you to make a name for yourself in the field and to be promoted. And in a similar vein, legacy, right? So one of the things, and this is a little bit silly, but I think it's relevant for this talk, is that it's fun to be the person who's known for something in research, because then that's always your legacy, right? I have thousands of great patients who are doing so much better with their eczema, or I treated their infantile hemangioma with propranolol. And I think really that's my legacy too. But it's fun to have this printed legacy of all the things I've learned and investigated along the way. And then the last thing, I hinted a little bit with promotion and faculty jobs, but if you can start early and really develop your research skills, then it's really nice as faculty to have that variety in your week. So one of the big things of burnout, although we all love patients, is it's really hard to crank through patients and notes every day. So it's wonderful if you have the opportunity, like I do, to build research in as well. So this is the why we do research, which is relevant for the how are we going to pitch our idea. And you really can't pitch an idea if you don't have a topic, obviously. There's, in my mind, really only two things to select a topic. There's a third, but for most of you who are students, it's still relevant, but I want you to start off a little bit with, what do you like? It's really hard to spend a lot of time in something if you're not interested in it. So if you spend hours, or for me now, it's been years researching something that you're not interested in, then you won't have that engagement. You won't be interested in building a legacy. You won't be interested in building it as part of your career. And then the other half of the equation is what is needed in the field. So even if you really are interested in something that's really well studied, then it becomes really hard to figure out, okay, where do I fit into this picture where there's already so many people studying this area? So when you're trying to select a research topic, those are two areas to start. What do you like? And then what is needed? For me, I was really fortunate. I actually started with what is needed. And there was not a lot, there's actually really nobody who studies the infant skin microbiome, specifically the neonatal skin microbiome. So I just happened to fall onto that, realized that nobody was really studying it, particularly in pediatric dermatology, particularly somebody who wasn't afraid to try to do studies in newborn infants. And then honestly, when I started it, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, because I'm not a microbiology major. I did not have a lot of that background. And so I had to build all of that. But then I started to really love the idea of, how does the microbiome shape the immune system? And then how does the immune system shape pediatric skin disease? And so that's where I really found my love and my passion. And so when you're selecting a topic and you're finding that passion, make sure you consider these things. The last piece that's not on here, which was relevant for me as well, is what opportunities are available in mentorship. So let's say you have your mentor, and your mentor is the world expert in infantile hemangiomas. So maybe even though there's a lot of research in infantile hemangiomas, then when you have that expertise in that mentorship, then you'll build off of that. The reason I didn't put that on the list is because I think that's really important. But if you don't like it and there's no additional research needed in that area, then you don't have to stay with that idea forever. That doesn't have to be your niche and your expertise. Okay, so for how to bring up your research, there's basically two scenarios I've been in where people have asked me about my research. And the first scenario where we're going to prepare a pitch is going to be scenario number one. It's what's called the elevator pitch. It's unsolicited. So let's say that you get into the elevator with the most awesome PeDRA person who you've always wanted to do research with, or how about Bill Gates, and you are trying to get him to fund your idea. So the one way to bring this up when it's unsolicited is to offer a question, to offer an intriguing question in that scenario, because it is more likely to pull somebody in than just to say, hey, I'm interested in research and this is what I studied. So can anybody think of a 1 or 2 line question that you might pitch to Bill Gates in the elevator?
Hey, Bill, I was wondering, what do you think the bacteria on a baby's skin is like?
Yeah, exactly. And see, and that's great, right? Because it's very short, but when you're in that awkward elevator silence, if you can start a conversation with a question, then you're basically forcing that person to engage with you. Then you're forcing Bill Gates to answer your question. He can be super socially awkward and just ignore you, and that's also fine. But because you're putting him on the spot, instead of just telling him your statement pitch, then he's going to feel compelled to respond. All right, well, mine is very similar to Elena's, because hey, Bill, have you ever wondered how all of the bacteria actually get onto a newborn's skin after they're born? So obviously, if this was Bill Gates or Amy Poehler or Ilona Frieden, it's going to be awkward no matter what. But if you say it in sort of a casual, comfortable, conversational question, then you are introducing your idea without pushing your research on somebody. So that's what we're trying to get across here. You notice that I'm not using a lot of jargon right away. You notice that I'm not going into a really long story right away. And the reason is because you never know what somebody's level of comfort is. And then also for all of you who have ever been at a talk, this one excluded, who've ever been at a talk, the talks where the speaker is conversational are way more engaging than the talks that are just, oh, this is my research, and then we did this, and then we looked at this, and then we found this. So the whole point of preparing your how to pitch your research idea should be about introducing it in conversation. Do we have something in the chat? Yeah, awesome. Hey, Bill, do you know that we can start regulating our immune system from the time of birth? Yes, exactly. Perfectly. So you see how it's not really like intimidating. Like, yes, Bill Gates is still going to think you're weird, but I think actually Bill Gates is a little bit weird anyways. So I think he's going to be way more likely to respond to your question than to respond to a robotic monologue about your research and why he should give you $1 million. Okay, excellent. Thanks, guys. Okay, so the next pitch would be for you to prepare something when somebody actually asks you about your research. Admittedly, this has been the scenario I've been in more often than not. And this sounds easy when I'm presenting it in this format, but it's much harder in reality because at the beginning, for me anyways, I was still figuring out exactly what my research was about. So that's okay. Again, you don't have to make it overly complicated. You want it to still be conversational. You don't want it to be too long. This one can be a little bit longer, right? Because somebody's asked you, they've given you the stage. But you don't want it to be full of jargon, and you don't want it to be boring. Any volunteers? Oh, and then I have, so what's called a zinger response. So all that means is, and I just made this up, by the way. All that means is just like, if somebody actually asks you about your research, you want to offer them something so electrifying, so interesting that they actually want to ask you more about it.
I'll take it again, Jen, but
Yes.
I'm going to go with my research interest this time.
Awesome.
Would you believe that children actually can get melanoma even though they don't spend decades out on the beach frying in the sun? That's how I would intro into pediatric melanoma.
Awesome. Yep. So you've used a conversational tone. You've started a conversation. You're not closing a door. So I like that. So this is what I have for mine. So if somebody said, hey, what's your research about? I would say I'm studying, well, this is one of the things I'm studying. I'm studying how bacteria actually get on the skin after a newborn is born. We understand actually very little about that process. Before, we thought that mode of delivery, vaginal or cesarean, determine the bacteria on the skin, but there's much more to the story. So something like that, this could be a little longer. Somebody's asked you, they want to know a little more. So you can have a little bit of a, this is what I'm studying. This is what we don't know. This is what we're trying to understand. So if you want to prepare either a quick response or a, this is what I'm studying, this is what we don't know, this is what we need to know, those are two different options for that zinger response pitch. Now, admittedly, I think my research is interesting. This may not be the most exciting. I'm sure you can make much more interesting pitches than this. And I'll admit, I actually should have done this sooner because, like I said at the beginning, I was figuring out exactly what my niche was. And so particularly for those of you who might be going to SPD or PeDRA, if you have a research idea that you are wanting to float by some faculty, try to practice, even though it's awkward, or write out what your response would be in these scenarios. And then final tips. The first is that passion translates. So I think even though I'm not particularly a excellent public speaker, I think I just really love what I do, and that comes across. And so I keep getting invited back to speak for PeDRA, for example, because if you are just interested and excited about it, then that's very contagious. And don't be a research robot. For those of you who have gone to the AED or some of the other meetings, really everybody is bored when people are just up there reading their data. So these pitches have to be the same way. It has to be starting a conversation. And then you want to invoke the curiosity in the person you're pitching to. You want them to want to know more about what you're interested in. And that is what I have to start you all thinking about this topic. Does anybody have any questions?
I'll ask you, Jen, how did you decide that this was your area of passion? I know you had a lot of exposures and experiences that brought you here.
Yeah. So the first year that I did, I got started in research, I was sort of wandering around campus, not like more figuratively, like trying to figure out what was at UF that I could sort of piggyback on. And also trying to figure out what I could build on from what I'd done before and what I was interested in and what needed to be done. And I literally just fell into it. I had a couple of dead ends that dried up, and I met somebody who was very engaging, who is an expert in the neonatal gut microbiome. So it really is loosely related to what I'm doing, but in a lot of ways isn't really the same at all. And then I started to look it up and realized nobody's doing this. Nobody's interested in the neonatal skin microbiome. And then I realized that I really honestly didn't care much about the microbiology, but I loved that the fact that whatever is going on early between the microbiome and the immune system is shaping what's happening later in pediatric skin disease, which means that if we can intervene early, then we can change the incidence, the severity of pediatric skin disease. And that excited me for sure. So that's what happened for me. But I mean, that process took over a year. So it's not as simple as it sounds.
So just to clarify, this is not what you pictured yourself doing when you were a med student, a resident, or even a fellow. This all came later.
No, and the reason I use the example of infantile hemangioma is because I spent a long time on a chart review project in infantile hemangiomas. And that's what I started working on a little bit when I got to UF. But then what happened is a lot has been done in infantile hemangioma. So I was having a hard time finding something I was excited about and a different angle to work on.
So Jen, I'll share that one of my journey, I guess my journey of exposures to dermatology, one of my big chart reviews was actually in alopecia, which I've done a turn away from that area. It's just pretty incredible how our paths sort of take us to where we are. I see Colleen with her hand up.
I have a question. So I'm very interested in HS, and no one knows what that is outside of dermatology. So how can you adjust those pitches for people who may not have any idea, like even a baseline frame of reference? Like most people know what melanoma is. People get the concept of bacteria on baby's skin, but like it's hard to ask a question about HS when people don't know what it is. So how can you, I guess, tailor things to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I'm going to have like a quick answer to that, but I think that assuming it's Bill Gates, right? Because Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they actually fund a lot of research. So what if you say something like, did you know that there's a horrible form of something that's really similar to acne that happens in people's armpits and groins and is really embarrassing and causes a lot of distress for X number of patients? You know, what if you made like an analogy to, I mean, it's like acne, but it's a lot worse. So I think that it's sort of like if I said the microbiome, a lot of people don't know what that is, but just the most simple version of it. Or, you know, if you talked about something like, you know, made it graphic, make it, you know, appeal like, oh, that does sound awful, like draining cysts, you know, things where people who don't have medical knowledge would understand what that means.
Colleen, I've got it. Hey, Bill, where's the deepest, darkest place you would never want to have a bad abscess or pimple?
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that. And then say that, and then imagine that there's millions of people who struggle with that, and not just one, but you know, tens or hundreds. That's a chronic disease for them.
So my question would be, if someone who, you know, doesn't have any experience in research, what would you say would be a good starting point to get into research in the first place?
Yeah, that's probably a whole different topic. But the short answer is that obviously you can't, nobody expects you, if you haven't done research before, to be pitching your research idea and have your own novel research idea. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes you're a student in clinic and you see something, you have a great idea. There's so many things in medicine that have happened that way. And if that ever happens to you, then definitely feel free to bring that up to a faculty. But otherwise, it's it's not an easy thing, but basically finding a mentor. Usually we all start, like I think Elena was saying too, we all start working under what our mentor's interest was. And some of us branch off of that and some of us find our own thing. So finding a mentor, working on what they're working on is usually the first step.
Okay, thank you.
But it's hard because there's just not enough pediatric dermatologists in this country or in the world. So we're all kind of spread thin and it's hard to get everybody involved.
So one thing I do when I meet someone new in clinic who's a student is at the end of the day, I say, hey, were there any patients that were more interesting to you than others? Like which patient is most exciting to you? And try to follow up either with a paper or see what research is being done on that condition. So that might be a neat way to get a quick lead if you have some exposure to patients.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a great idea. Yeah, because sometimes we have interesting things that happen in clinic and then we talk about it afterwards. And then a student will go home and look something up and come back and say, hey, this is crazy. Nobody's actually ever looked at this medicine for this condition and if it is effective or not. So
I have a similar question. So when picking a research mentor at the very beginning, stage of doing research, when I don't really know what I'm doing, would you say it's more important to find someone who's working on what you're interested in, or would you say it's better to, just join someone who's good at teaching you how to do research? Does that make sense?
I think early the right person is more important than the right topic.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, because you sort of have to learn the ropes first before you can figure out what interests you. Again, there have been a few students who have come to me who have had this whole interest thing that's hashed out, and people a lot of times will be responsive to that. But I think the right person is more important than trying to jump around and finding somebody who will latch onto your idea at this point. But don't let go of that idea because you can certainly circle back to it. For example, our residents, they all propose their own research idea. So if you're a student now and then you work with faculty, you learn how to do research, you become a resident and you have an idea, then we can run with it. Even most of the things I do with residents have nothing to do with the neonatal skin microbiome.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Jen.
you
That was
so
a great talk.
much.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Dr. Schoch for a lovely presentation on how to bring up a research topic. For other educational resources, visit us at www.pedraresearch.org.